Welcome, and my name is Natalia Vicente, and I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs at GSOA, the Global Satellite Association. Today I'm here to host this webinar on Satellite Lifeline in Crisis, Disaster Preparedness and Recovery. Thank you very much for joining us today. As you know, this topic of disaster and preparedness is very close to the heart of the satellite operators, the satellite community, but not only, also the international institutions, and is lately one of the topics that is becoming more relevant for all of us. Today, I'm joined here with a set of experts in different domains. We have Laurent Saran from UNOSA, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. We have Veli Yannick-Konul from Turksat, Oscar Kaleman from World Food Programme, and Donna Bethea Murphy from Viasat. So without further ado, I would very much like to hear from them that definitely they are the experts and have extensive experience on how to deal with this matter. Just giving a little bit of an overview or setting up the scene. Indeed, we had a big experience on a disaster situation when we had COVID, and what has happened to the mindset of thinking how connectivity is relevant for society to actually continue functioning and continue engaging. But not only with COVID, but we've had earthquakes, and we have tsunamis, and we have different disasters that makes us realize how important it is to have connectivity after disaster happens, but very much also how important it is to be prepared before a disaster happens. And so today we will go and discuss with the different speakers about challenges, about opportunities, lessons learned, what is still needed, and how can we make sure that we do better. I would very much like everyone to introduce themselves and with the company that they represent or the group that they represent, so that we can get into this interactive discussion. So let me start with Donna, please.
I'm Donna Bethea Murphy. I'm a Senior Vice President of Regulatory, Global Regulatory at Viasat. And I previous to that, I was with the Federal Communications Commission, Iridium, which is a LEO, PanAmSat, which was a GEO, and then AirTouch, which at the time was the world's biggest terrestrial company. And in all of those functions, understanding how to react and prepare for disaster played a very big role. So I look forward to today's panel.
Laurent?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Laurent Saran. I work for the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. I manage the UN SPIDER program within the office, and I will talk more about that in my time. I've been with the UN for about 28 years now and worked in humanitarian affairs, peacekeeping, environment, and very often exposed to satellite technology applications, including communications. So very much look forward to share with you my points of view and experience. Thank you.
Veli?
Thank you, Natalia. My name is Veli Yannick-Konul. I am the Director of Spectrum Management at Turksat, the Turkish satellite operator. I have in my career a background of satellite design, and afterwards I proceed with the spectrum management issues. Right now I'm managing the spectrum issues within Turksat. And thank you, everyone.
And Oscar.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Oscar Kaleman. I work with the United Nations World Food Programme in a capacity as ICT emergency responder and coordinator with focus on the Asia Pacific region. And I've in the past and in the present led a lot of response operations on behalf of the emergency telecommunications cluster, and I will allude to a little bit about that during my responses as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. So now that we all know each other, I want to start with some questions, but for sure during the session, please let's intervene whenever we want to add or to have a little bit more of a dialogue style. And I also invite, as we said, the audience to share their questions in the Q&A so that we can bring it to the speakers. And let's start a little bit from the operator side. Donna, I know you have been following this topic and have been involved in disaster and preparedness already for a while. And I would like to hear your views precisely on the operator side. We always think about the importance of the connectivity after a disaster happens, but what about the before? Is it just the solution to have a plan for what happens when disaster strikes, or is there something that we can do beforehand?
I think that, thanks Natalia for that question. I think that's the most critical question we can discuss, because frankly, preparedness is going to save more lives than we will once the disaster has struck. When we think about preparedness, and the reason we're discussing satellites in this emergency context is satellites have a reliability that is not associated with a local disaster site. So the beam of a satellite can cover a whole region, it can cover a country, it can cover, a state. And having satellite equipment pre-deployed in critical infrastructure places like public utilities, world leaders, that is going to mean that when something happens, they can stay in touch and keep the government and the utilities running. But you can't just deploy the equipment. You need to train people. You need to run drills. I think that one of the most interesting things is, as an operator, who am I going to call to see if someone needs something, and who are they going to call as the regulator to get in touch with me? So I think that it's important not only for the training and the preparedness, but to have a plan for what you're going to do. Then the early warning system, do we know the disaster is going to strike? And someone mentioned the Pacific, there are a number of tsunameters that rely on satellites that are out there, and they're constantly monitoring the movement of tectonic plates to let countries know if a tsunami is coming. There are also many other types of early warning systems that rely on satellites, such as the monitoring of dams that are controlling mining debris and protecting all the towns that are downstream from those kind of things. But once you have the warning, then you need then the first responders come in, and even as first responders come in, oftentimes the infrastructure is destroyed. You can't get in on a road or on a plane. So satellites allow the first group of UN and military personnel to come in and prepare for everyone else to get in. So satellites in each of these steps are important, and I'll stop there. But I think that being prepared is what's critical here. And I'm sorry, I want to make one other comment because this came up the other day with the flooding in the UAE. One of the regulators said, well, the problem is we have a warning, and no one actually believed that it would happen. And so not only do we need the warning system, but we also need a way to create trust once we have that. So.
And this brings me very much to some questions. I already have questions that are flagged because of what you're saying, and it's we have all this data. You are mentioning that we have the information that a flooding is coming. Is how we make sure that this data is also shared and cross-checked, and then that the process starts, no? Whether it happens or not, how we make sure that there's plans for disaster that are implemented in the countries, and it's not just talking between us, and that we know it needs to happen. So who are the players that need to be involved in this discussion?
I think that when I'm looking at a regulatory point of view, I think it's important to touch base with trusted sources. For example, the ITU works on disaster management all the time. And if you're looking for a non-commercial source to talk about disaster or preparedness plans, they're really great. There are countries who I think are, in my opinion, leaders in the preparation for disasters. For example, Japan has an amazing continuing operation plans and requirements for satellite and other types of backups within first responders and within the leaders in the country and in businesses. And the country like the US also requires government agencies to do continuing operation drills. So there are both countries you can look towards, or groups such as the ITU, the development sector specifically, that are experts in this. And I think that, you know, having a plan, practicing the plan is what's going to save lives.
And this brings me very much to Oscar. You have mentioned, Donna, the ITU, but indeed the World Food Programme also is very involved in this kind of preparedness programs. And you've mentioned briefly in your introduction about the Crisis Connectivity Charter. So I would really like to hear a little bit more about what is it and how the collaboration is relevant for these programs or these plans to take place. But also, are there any lessons learned, things that we can improve as an ecosystem?
Thank you, Natalia. Yeah, first of all, WFP is the lead of the emergency telecommunications cluster, which is a network of it's a partnership network that includes, amongst many others, ITU as well, where we together respond to crises to provide connectivity both to affected population, but primarily for humanitarian actors responding to crisis, but also governments. So our role is to ensure that the gaps that inevitably tend to occur in a time of crisis are addressed. And we do that together, hand in hand with the private sector. And we have been doing this since the cluster system, as it's called, the humanitarian cluster system was established now almost 20 years ago. And we have been involved in, the ETC has been involved in humanitarian response since, I think the first one was in Pakistan back in 2005. And then ever since then, now, of course, in Sudan and Ukraine, we're active. Back, I think it was 2015, the Crisis Connectivity Charter was signed between the ETC and its members and 11 signatories from the private sector satellite side, with the idea to ensure that satellite connectivity was provided in times of crisis. And it came with a number of different components, and I'd like to link back to what Donna was alluding to just before, around preparedness, training, and being ready to work together in a time of crisis, to know how we will respond, together, and how we respond effectively in a crisis. But to me, the Crisis Connectivity Charter is one of those really good examples where you see a very good collaboration and a link between what we do in the humanitarian sphere and what the private sector can contribute with. And contribute, I think, it's a maybe not the best way to put it, because we see in many crises now over in recent history where the private sector is more in a lead than a contributor. And I can think about the response recently to Turkey, where the private sector took a very strong lead and was very much able to provide emergency response and capacity across all fields, not just within the connectivity field. What's also crucial, and I think this is worth mentioning when it comes to the link between the private sector and the humanitarian side, is the role of the local community and the local operators and the local service providers, because their role in a time of crisis is crucial. They are there on the ground. They don't need to fly in from from faraway countries. They are actually there, and they will by default be the first responders. And the role of the local private sector and local partners has increased over the years. And I think specifically where I saw it sort of strongly the first time was in the earthquake in Nepal back in 2015, where the private sector stood up as one. When I talk about the private sector around connectivity, and jointly responded and prioritized and collaborated to ensure that the emergency response was done in the most effective way. I'll stop there because otherwise I'll ramble and consume everybody's time. So back to you, Natalia.
No, but we really like to hearing your experiences on this. But precisely, you've mentioned the earthquake in Turkey, and I have no other option than to ask Veli, precisely as the local operator there, a bit to know a bit how was it for you guys, what were the actions taken. So really knowing about the experience on the ground when this happened a little bit back, but also what do you think about the challenges that are still to overcome with that experience that you've had? What is there that didn't work or that worked very nicely that others could replicate? So Veli, share with us your experience on this, please.
Thank you, Natalia, for the question. As you said, in Turkey, we had a tremendous earthquake over a very vast region, great region. So given the affected area is so huge, it was very difficult to act in all affected places. So in terms of the communication, it was a challenge for us as well. For the effective communication, Turksat was there at the affected area from the first day. Turksat has worked with the government entities, the disaster and emergency management institutes, and Turkish Red Crescent to provide the critical connectivity at that time. So the most important thing, I think, to be able to act quickly during an emergency, you need to have the required technological and logistical infrastructure in place and act very, very quickly. So what we did at that time, we were already, having some emergency master plan and working with the government institutions to establish like coordination centers and mobile data transfer vehicles, training activities for their staff, etc. But after the earthquake as well, for the response, in addition to providing the additional required SATCOM capabilities in the region, I would like to emphasize that we were also working hand in hand with the other sectors like IMT sector, because during the earthquake, all terrestrial infrastructure was damaged, or if not overloaded. We worked with the Turkish IMT operators to supply them with required capacity, additional capacity, or if their systems are off, to provide them the capacity, like through satellite backhaul, so that people can access connectivity as quick as possible, because everyone has a mobile phone in their hands or pockets, etc. If you can quickly adapt and provide additional support for the other sectors, like IMT sector, then you can make a difference, and it's when it's needed and when it's so urgent. So the thing I would emphasize in this regard is like the the key elements is public-private partnerships and cooperation, working with the government institutions effectively, and providing services to the affected people with an integrated, manner, like the cooperation we try to have with the terrestrial mobile operators. So in addition to this, as I said, required technological infrastructure like the capacity on your satellites will be very important at that time, and the logistical preparedness, having logistical contingency plans will be very important. So I'll stop here. Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you, Veli. And I invite all the audience to start raising some questions in the Q&A. But before we start answering some of those, I want to also give Laurent the opportunity to come in, because we definitely are focusing on the options that connectivity and satellite connectivity specifically, the impact it has when a disaster happens, and the importance to be prepared on this. But indeed, we also have different kinds of services that are provided by space. Some of those being Earth observation, some of those feeding on programs that are also very relevant when it comes to disaster. And I know that Laurent, UNOSA has a program, and you mentioned it, the UN Spider program, and I think it will be very valuable to understand a bit better what this program does, and how does it benefit, so that we can all learn about it.
Thank you very much, Natalia. The UN Spider program, it stands for UN Platform for Space-Based Information for Disaster Management and Emergency Response. It's a long name for it, but it's in essence trying to connect space technologies and space technology providers with the disaster management entities at national level in the countries we support. And it is not only, of course, one or the other technology. We are looking at Earth observation, but also satellite telecommunications and satellite navigation. So it's in essence, we might be known a bit more for the Earth observation side and facilitating access to satellite data, because that's crucial in disaster management and response. But the mandate of the program is covering all these three different types of technologies. And since 2006, when the UN General Assembly established the program and placed it within the Office for Outer Space Affairs, we visited or provided advice to about 55 countries around the world. And these are the countries which do not necessarily have easy access to these technologies, or struggle with awareness and information related to how they can use these technologies. So we provided advisory support, we built capacity, we provided training, and we also try to learn about what the gaps are at the country level. We produced very detailed reports after having visited each country, after having met with different ministries in the country, and identified areas where space technologies could support more and where improvements could be made at the national level in using these technologies. And I have to say that very often we meet a lot of issues, or we find a lot of issues related to connectivity as well. It's not only access to data, but it's also about connectivity, to be able to connect sensor networks, weather stations, having live access to data. That's very important for forecasting. In general, the connectivity of the regional and the provincial and the local disaster management entities. Very often there is no connectivity between the national headquarters, let's say, and these different field offices. Just in December, I was in the Pacific Islands, since that was mentioned. We were visiting a number of island states there, and it was quite eye-opening to learn, for example, in Cook Islands, how a country spread over 118 islands over 1 million square kilometers. Only a few of those islands have permanent connectivity, and all the others are literally disconnected after a disaster or after anything happening for days until information can be accessed. So there's a lot of needs that are unmet yet. And indeed, as it was mentioned before, preparedness is important. We have to be ready. We have to use these technologies a lot better in many of those countries to ensure that they are well prepared and that they can communicate and that they can transfer data. Transferring Earth observation data to the ground is also a heavy data, so it takes time. If you don't have good connectivity, that doesn't work. You cannot provide near real-time access to the satellite data that they might need to answer, to respond to a disaster, to look at damage, to look at impact. So there's a lot to be done in this field, despite all the good initiatives out there. And I think the visits and the reports we have, happy to share them, are kind of witness to that. I stop there for now, but happy to, of course, elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. And you bring some ideas also, because precisely in many cases, the populations or the regions that are struck the most by natural disasters are in many cases those ones that are not yet connected. And I think it's maybe food for thought, how already connecting everyone to a network could facilitate the preparedness for a disaster, no? And we hear precisely that satellite, we've heard it from Donna and from Veli, the reliability, the coverage that it has as qualities for the satellite technology. But we also have heard how important it is to have capacity building, how important it is to have logistical preparation, and part of it, this webinar that is also precisely done in collaboration with the Space Business Qualified Training, that indeed focuses on also providing this information or certain information on satellite and space to all kind of regulators and operators and everyone, so that I think a bit more on the information is power, so that we can all be ready. But I would like to bring one of the questions that we have from the audience that is directed to Donna specifically, but I think anyone else can answer that. It's more on the regulatory side. So it's the question reads, governments take long to grant licenses for satellite equipments. Therefore, what's your take on that? How could it be improved? And is there something that regulations should change in view of providing these licenses faster?
So thanks for the question, and I'm going to answer it in the capacity that we're in today, which is disaster management. And I think that as part of the preparedness, governments need to decide who and what they're going to do during a disaster for allowing maybe additional spectrum to be used, additional equipment to be used. And you know, if I am Viasat and I want to operate in a country that has a disaster, who am I going to call and how quickly can they turn around? Because one of the things that we know, and I'm sure that many of the other panelists can talk to you about, the first 24 to 92 hours is the most critical to find people. You know, there's a lot of people can thirst to death. People could be in very dangerous and precarious situations. So being able to push a license out quickly is critical. So I think there needs to already be a plan before disaster strikes as part of the preparedness by the regulator. I also think part of that plan really needs to be customs, because a regulator can grant a license for new equipment to be brought in, but if there is no connection between that grant and the customs agents, and having the customs agent understand that very specific things are coming into the country and they need to be prioritized, then, you know, doing that fast grant is not really going to get us where we need to be. There, I can name many instances where this has been a challenge. So I think that those two need to be looked at. I also think that regulators, you know, I've heard criticism of a couple of regulators after some of the tsunamis. And regulators are also looking to protect their country and make sure that equipment's not coming into the country that can't be used and shouldn't be there. So I think that, again, is why it needs to be thought of in preparation before the disaster strikes.
Thank you, Donna. And indeed, you've partially answered the second question that we had, that it was precisely what happens when we have a pushback from governments concerning bringing this equipment into their countries. But I would like also, Oscar, maybe you can share and add on this, because I know for a fact that, well, during the COVID situation in which planes were not flying, we faced a few challenges there. There was the situation in Vanuatu, the disaster happening in Vanuatu, in which, and I know some of you were involved in all this conversation, but I think it was a clear example of, well, something is happening, we don't have planes traveling, we need to bring material to Vanuatu, and it's there's challenges, and also there's the barriers, the customs, as you were mentioning in other occasions. And in some occasions, it's also geopolitical situations that prevent us, or even that a disaster is in between borders. Disasters do not happen in one country only. It can happen very much in between borders, and that complexifies who are we dealing with, no? And so maybe anyone, definitely, but Oscar, that I know that the WFP was involved there, but don't hesitate, and the others, maybe you can share a bit of what to do then.
And I'm happy to, and let me just start off maybe touching on some of the points that Donna tabled as well. When we talk about emergency preparedness, because for us this is our bread and butter. This is the key. There is a number that's typically thrown around, which goes $1 spent in preparedness is worth $10 in an emergency. And we actually did some proper studies around that and looked at return on investment in preparedness. And it is a fairly accurate figure, meaning that if we invest in preparedness today, that will have a direct impact on our ability to respond and provide connectivity to populations, governments, humanitarian workers in the time of crisis, or ensuring that connectivity is still there. And a part of that connectivity, again, linking back to Donna's point, that preparedness is about training, is about ensuring the processes are in place, the coordination mechanisms are in place, and we have clear roles in a time of crisis. So that can be the regulator being clear on are there fast-track processes for us to bring equipment in? Maybe they, in some countries, have been very good at establishing rapid customs clearance processes for emergencies. These things are part of the preparedness. The last thing we want to do is to invent processes or procedures in the middle of a crisis, or build a plane and fly it at the same time. It's not what we want to be doing. And we have seen the cases where this has been done where there has been thorough investment in preparedness, and the direct impact that has in the ability of governments and humanitarians to respond to crisis. It is a complete game changer when it is done right. Let me also then, we come to your question there, Natalia, around access and cross-border you mentioned. I would say, and I'll stick my neck out and say, I think today when it comes to connectivity in emergencies, so humanitarian connectivity, let's call it that. The challenge is less technical. For us, the seat where I'm sitting, we have the solutions are there. There are fantastic operators that provide services, both terrestrial and celestial, that we can use in emergencies. We now have a toolbox which is much bigger than it was 10 years ago. What is new for us is that we have what I call imposed restrictions, where we have nation states or perhaps subnational entities that will prevent connectivity from being provided. So they will limit connectivity in a certain area. They will prevent equipment from being brought in. They won't allow, they won't license equipment to be used. And that then having a direct impact on our ability to provide assistance to the people in need. It hampers the coordination, it hampers our ability to respond, and we're seeing it day to day in most of the operations that we are in today. I don't want to list countries, but I think you can think of quite a number of them today and going in, and especially when it comes to context where there is an armed conflict that is a trigger for that. Again, a lot of these challenges can be addressed by having focused preparedness work done together with government actors, together humanitarians in the local context. Because in some cases, there is a regulatory gap and the governments are not prepared to actually fast track the importation, and the default will be to go to steady state processes or to simply say no because there are concerns that may be well-founded or perhaps otherwise.
So I don't know, Veli, maybe you want to add? Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, Natalia, thank you very much. Donna and Oscar, touched very important issues, but I also would like to talk a little bit more about the regulatory aspect. For emergency cases to be able to respond effectively, of course, it's obvious that the satellite technologies can help a lot. But for this to be able to happen, there is a significant need for enabling regulations, satellite-friendly regulations. If the country does not have this kind of regulations, there would not be a healthy and powerful satellite industry within the country. The local satellite operators, both in terms of it can be SATCOM operators or Earth observation operators, or the international operators. In any case, the countries has required enabling regulations in place. The countries needs that so that when it comes to the preparation and the response for disaster and emergency cases, then the country may have the capability to use these means. So these regulations might be the regulations pertaining to the satellite spectrum, but also the administrative regulations concerning the deployment of the satellite terminals. So there are a lot of limitations in terms of deployment of the terminals in some countries that will limit the potential for those countries to use this capability in case of disaster and emergency. So I would stress the importance of the regulatory aspect.
Thank you very much, Veli. And Loran?
Yeah, I just want to maybe mention from another perspective, these are definitely all critical issues that are discussed. There are also some situations where at the country level, things could go a bit faster. It's also important not to only discuss with the telecommunications authority in such emergency situations. There is a disaster management entity, and they have a lot of coordination roles and powers when it comes to an emergency and to responding. And I think they need to also be involved in making things smoother and in a way jumping over regulatory barriers when it comes to responding to a disaster. For example, in many countries, I can mention Zambia, I can mention Cook Islands that we visited recently. The disaster management authority is within the office of the Prime Minister. So that's where everything comes down to all the different ministries, including telecommunications. And those mechanisms work well in a disaster situation. So that internal coordination also helps sometimes overcome this barrier. So I think it's important to involve the disaster management authority as much as possible in addressing these issues when it comes to importation and deployment of technology, etc. Just wanted to point that out.
And let me follow up with you, Loran, in some of the points that you've made and you've raised. Definitely involving this disaster management authority is a good process. I'm not sure if all countries have this authority. So that's a first question, but also how can we help support the countries to implement or have those plans if some of them are working in certain countries, how can we make sure, is it possible actually, because we know that countries differ on their organization too. So how can we duplicate this in other countries, or more than duplicate, replicate this in other countries? And also we understand that there's different initiatives, and we understand Crisis Connectivity Charter or the Humanitarian Crisis Charter, and we know that there's others. How can we make sure we are not overlapping, duplicating, and therefore creating a more complex and crazier process than we want, and so that we help less than we actually want to? So maybe Laurent, you can start with this, and then the others can join in.
Thanks, and that's not an easy answer. But I think from all the 55 countries I mentioned we visited, all of them had some sort of disaster management authority. In some cases, it's a ministry. In other cases, it is an authority which is independent or sitting under the Prime Minister's office or some other governmental coordination mechanism. So most of them do have it, and not to speak about developed countries where there's always a civil protection or disaster management authority. So I would say that's not a problem. They exist everywhere in some form. It can be a civil protection, it could be disaster management, disaster risk reduction entity, whatever they call it, it exists. Now, overcoming these, I think, challenges that you mentioned, well, it's important to discuss or to communicate, and by here I'm not mentioning satellite communications now, to communicate between the different mandated entities that have these kind of functions and roles also internationally. I mean, we as UNUSA have a mandate to connect the space technologies with the disaster management entities. WFP has its mandate to provide this emergency telecommunications, and others have certain roles in this international context. I think it's important that we discuss and we coordinate a bit more. I don't think it's always happening. It doesn't work well. And that also leads to lack of awareness very often at the country level. I can tell you that in many of the countries we visited, those countries' disaster management entities had no information about this Crisis Connectivity Charter. They simply do not know about it. What we do from our side is raise awareness when we can. We can develop and write down best practices, just as those we mentioned. We can publish them on our web portal. We have a knowledge portal, a UN Spider portal that you can find easily. We publish those, and we organize trainings, capacity strengthening in countries where we bring together the various authorities and explain them about the different options they have at their hands, including these different charters and mechanisms to access technology. So this is what we have to do more. Our office is, of course, quite small, unknown in itself, limited in resources right now. We can't do this, big time in a lot of countries every year. We have a lot more requests than we can satisfy, but this needs to be done more. I believe that the more we do this, the more we raise awareness. Countries and governmental entities will know about these solutions and mechanisms, and they will reach out and ask for support.
And I think it's a good, yeah, please, Oscar.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just want to pick up on some of the points that Laurent mentioned, and Natalia, you as well, on the role of the government when it comes to emergency response and coordination. If I think back to 2010 during the Haiti earthquake, that sort of scenario where you go in and there is very little of national lead because of the scope of the disaster, but also because of the state of the country where we operated. That sort of scenario is very rare today. If we respond to Central African Republic or to Vanuatu, I'm thinking Cyclone Pam in 15 or Harold in 20, there will always be a government entity that is in the lead. And for us as humanitarians coming into a country, our role is to support the government in enabling them to provide a response. Right? We are there to fill the gap and work with them. And that goes, of course, also to provide ensuring connectivity is available to those government entities that are responding. A big role that we play as the ETC, the Emergency Telecommunications Cluster, is to coordinate the response, to be that, not necessarily the one that's deploying the VSATs, there's loads of commercial sector that can do that, or necessarily to be the one setting up towers, but to be the one to coordinate and address exactly that point that Laurent made, to minimize the duplication and ensure that we don't leave gaps unattended. And that's really the core of what we do. For us, a successful response is one where we don't respond. It's one where we have invested together with government and private sector and partners locally in preparedness to a point where we say, well, we didn't have to go. We've seen that quite a bit in the Pacific, where the ETC has been active for quite a number of years now, with focus on preparedness, enabling governments from Tonga to Cook to Fiji, and ensuring that they are as best prepared as they can be when a crisis hits. Unfortunately, it's when, it's not if. We've seen other fantastic examples, for example, in Mozambique, where the National Disaster Management Authority has built up their capacity and very rarely need the intervention of international service providers or humanitarian response, because they have invested in that preparedness and are now in a much better position to lead and coordinate the response themselves.
And it's very good to hear that the ETC, the cluster, works as that point of contact, that a unique point of contact that helps to avoid these overlaps or these confusions. And we were mentioning how important it is to connect prior, or to be connected, to be prepared prior to any disaster. And it links very much with a question that we have, but I want to give it a little bit more framework, and probably directed to Donna Velli, the operator side, because we are seeing a lot of innovation in the sector also. Disasters has been there forever, and satellite has always played a role on it, but the innovation is happening, and there's this integration of technologies, and also now a lot of investment on the direct to devices. And what is this gonna mean precisely on the emergency world, in which we have always had the satellite phones, but now it's becoming, or the investment is to make it more accessible. So the question also mentions, how is this going to work? It focuses a little bit more on specific details. Let me just put it on live. It focuses on specific details on the billing, and I think maybe that's a little bit too far into the thinking, but it will be very interesting to hear. Maybe Donna, you can take this answer. How do you think that all this innovation that's happening in the sector is going to have an impact on how we work on emergencies?
Thanks, Natalia, for that. And I want to come back for a second to what Veli said earlier, which I think is a point that I didn't mention when I was talking about regulations. I think that governments need positive satellite spectrum and operation regulations from the start. Emergency satellite communications and what you do, what you prepare for before a disaster and during a disaster is assumes already, positive regulations. And that brings me to the innovation you were talking about, Natalia, which is, direct to device, so that my phone here has the ability to connect to a satellite when it is not in coverage of terrestrial. And I think both that and what's coming up in 3GPP with 5G and 6G and the satellite integration into that is going to be a game changer when it comes to responding to disasters and emergency communications. And I think that is going to make a huge difference, because we all have one of these, and it's going to be important for regulators to continue to have positive regulations to make sure that innovation can occur.
Thank you very much, Donna. And indeed, I think this topic is a hope for all of us. I think we see this innovation happening as really a change, but a hope for how we are going to interact with technology also. And I mean, whether we talk about the disasters, but the prevention of certain situations that could get bad if there's no connectivity. But if we have it, it's just a simple anecdote in our lives, no? So the work of I like how everything gets to be linked now. We talk about the innovation and emergency and preparedness as part of the same equation, no? And it's not a silo discussion anymore. And I think precisely having these conversations with the clusters, with the operators, with the institutions as UNOSA are very relevant to make sure that we are putting the things in place and building the things in place that need to happen, and regulators to understand what are those steps to be taken. I don't know if you want to add something more on this part of the innovation.
Well, one of the things I was going to add onto that is upcoming at the next World Radio Conference, there are something like 11 satellite agenda items, and direct to device and the ability to operate in this manner is clearly at the forefront of regulators' minds. And it shows how important this is and what governments think about global regulations, the ability to operate anywhere, anytime, with anyone, not just the first responders who have my satellite phone, but anyone could do that. I think that it's going to be important for governments to make flexible regulations to support positive outcomes on these discussions, and sort of think outside of the normal box. Sometimes it's tough to get past a cell tower and a LTE device, but I think that understanding that all of this can work together and what it will bring from a both innovative point of view and a lifestyle point of view is going to be critical for regulators. So I think they're going to have to be more flexible and sort of think, look a little bit more towards the sky when they're making decisions as opposed to just looking on the ground. I also think that, well, I'll stop there.
Veli, I think you wanted to add something also.
Yes, Natalia, Donna phrased it very well. She read my mind. She mentioned that there are a lot of, new topics to be discussed for the next WRC World Radio Communication Conference within the ITU. The majority of the agenda items, topics are satellite related. This already shows that the satellite industry is, advancing the technology, and a lot of new developments happening in the satellite technology, including the direct-to-device technology, and also 5G and 6G, which was traditionally understood as a terrestrial technology, but from now on, it's a joint seamless technology, including both terrestrial and satellite components. We are, within 3GPP and within ITU, we are working to enable 5G and 6G technologies together with the terrestrial industry, IMT industry, so that people can receive benefit from seamless connectivity anywhere, anytime. So this has, of course, has a reflection for the disaster and emergency cases, because this will improve the communication industry's capability to respond to those cases, because just to be to capture it shortly, communication is the difference between the chaos and order. So this is very important. Finally, I would, also like Donna stress the importance of the support to be provided by the governments for having this enabling and technology, communication-friendly regulations, both in their national authority, national domain, but as well as supporting those regulatory aspects within the international organizations like the ITU.
Thank you, Veli. I like very much how we hear all the things that need to happen for having a more prepared world for these disasters. We hear about the collaboration that is needed between the different actors, between the different stakeholders, and also the involvement. And I think that's an important part, the involvement of all the different stakeholders in a way that we better understand the needs and we better support those needs. I like that you said that Donna almost read your mind. I think that means, are we all actually in the same page now? And that's why we are all working together, not only on the side of the operators for sure, but are we living a change in mindset so that we have understood that technology and communications and connectivity is something that we need to use as a tool to support the cases or the use cases and the situations. And as a last question, maybe you've both mentioned WRC, and we know that that's something that we very much follow as a topic of interest for satellite. There's other decisions, the regulatory decisions, and of course every country works on different agendas. To what extent or how can we better support that awareness and that realization on those policymakers and those that make the spectrum decisions, to make that link in between those decisions and the impact that they are having in day-to-day life, no? And is there anything that we could do better to bring together that community or the whole community to support them and to make sure that they are ready, prepared, and have the tools to implement the disaster plans? Veli, take the floor, and then Oscar, you follow.
Okay, thank you. If you know that this is a very important question. You know that we are talking about disaster preparedness and response now, but these technologies are very important for people for their daily life. So these decisions are to be taken at the international organizations or within the national domain will be very important, will be very, quite game-changing. So I would stress the importance of this, supporting this kind of activities.
So maybe Oscar, you can follow.
Yeah, thank you. No, just a thought that wearing my humanitarian hat here. I think we collectively need to look at connectivity in times of crisis and ensuring that responders, governments, and affected population have connectivity in times of crisis as something that runs parallel, but is not immediately linked to the, let's say, the business opportunity or the financial ambitions of the service providers, and it's a challenging space to make sure that of course there is a link, but how do we make sure that it doesn't necessarily impact how we deliver connectivity assistance in times of crisis? I think the Crisis Connectivity Charter tried to address some of that. I'm not sure it went all the way because there was that sort of lack of clarity. Where does humanitarian response start and where does it stop, and what happens before and what happens after? So I think that's something that I think would be worthwhile to think through even more, and to make sure that we as a private sector and public and humanitarian sector really crack that nut and make sure that we, at least when we step into collaboration and step into response, that we have a common understanding. What does connectivity and humanitarian crisis look like? what are the parameters that we work around. As I'm sure you know, there are discussions of talking about connectivity as a human right, and connectivity as aid has been there for quite some time, and something that we see as part of the types of assistance that we provide, and we want to ensure that the affected populations have in a time of crisis. Thank you.
Donna, please.
Thanks. I just want to emphasize something that Oscar and Veli talked about, which is, the public-private partnership is something that's important to look at. And connectivity can't just be about disaster. There has to be, a focus on investment and making it easier to invest by not having complicated regulations. Because if you do that, then you're going to have the DDD handsets, you're going to have, a Wi-Fi hotspot. And I think that regulators, and this is going to be the big challenge that I almost didn't mention before, need to look towards a different licensing regime other than auction, because that's just really a model for giving licenses to one sort of technology. I think sort of looking at technologies as a whole and figuring out how we can innovate with all types of technologies will require, a different type of licensing. And I have confidence that looking at regulations and innovations, that countries don't want to be left behind when it comes to this sort of innovation. And I think that's going to be critical as well.
And maybe, Laurent, you want to also conclude, but I see that modernization is something that we get from your interventions. But Laurent, please.
Thank you. Yeah, very briefly, I think there's a lot left to do. As I mentioned, there's too much need we find out there that's not addressed. We do have a long way to go in satisfying all those. I think we have to keep building that awareness. I think solutions we can find. I would like to see, I also can say that with the different commercial providers we interacted in the recent past, there's a strong willingness to provide support, and especially in the early stages of any crisis or disaster situation. It's the same in the Earth observation community. Satellite imagery, Earth observation data in a high resolution domain costs a lot, but there's a lot of willingness to provide it at no cost when the situation requires it. And I agree with Oscar, that does not conflict in any way with having a commercial in a way or respecting that commercial value and everything for those products going forward. But in emergencies, in disaster situations, this is very much important to come together and do the best we can at a very rapid pace. So I think we feel we have a lot to contribute, and we'll be happy to work together with other partners as you and USA in bringing these technologies and the awareness of these technologies to many countries out there that still need it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a last question that I am going to take, and I will be the one answering it, because I think it matches with what we have been hearing between you all guys, how important this awareness and raising awareness and collaboration is, and how are we making sure that the next and new policymakers are informed and aware of all that's happening, and all the tools that are being built and the information. And I'm gonna be saying that I think continuing on these conversations and this collaboration is key, but also the training side. And for this, I invite everyone that is joining us as attendants to also check the Space Business Qualified training, the SBQ training, that is also a very interesting tool to better understand how the satellite and the space environment works. So I think that's also one of the things that policymakers and regulators can add to their list of welcoming packages of new candidates to the job. But indeed, investing in training and investing in capacity building for everyone is key. And with this, we've gone to the top of the hour. And I would like to thank very much the panelists. I think this is a conversation that we will have over and over and update each other on the best practices and the lessons learned. And I hope to see you all soon. And for the attendance, I thank you very much for joining this virtual webinar on Life in Crisis, Disaster Preparedness and Recovery that we do in partnership with SBQ Training. And I invite you also to check our channel with all the other webinars that are there recorded. Thank you very much.